1984 by George Orwell is placed at the top of many reading lists. It's a book that I had heard of before, but had never actually read, mainly because, well, reading was never really something I did, at least not until this year when I decided to try reading more. There is a lot of great books out there, and I don't want to die without ever having read them. And so, like with a lot of things I do, I've also decided to document my experience working through this list of the best books by simply talking about them. However, quick disclaimer, if you haven't guessed already, I'm not an expert when it comes to anything, really. I'm just an average guy trying to figure shit out. And to be honest, I kind of feel like I'm jumping right in at the deep end with this one, because this book has a lot to say. In fact, the author, George Orwell, had written this book as a political warning, a way of reminding people about the dangers of unchecked power and how it could lead to the loss of freedom and truth. Things that we certainly don't want to lose, you know? Like, sometimes I think the world is already fucked, but then you read this book and you see how things could be a whole lot worse. This is one of the most famous dystopian novels. In fact, it is so dystopian that the term Orwellian was coined as a way of describing similar ideas and situations. 1984 is set within a massive superstate called Oceania. It's a total nightmare, or a totalitarian nightmare, am I right? A society where every aspect of your life is controlled, watched and manipulated by the party. The party is a ruling force that is led by the figure of Big Brother. It's never confirmed if Big Brother is a real person or just a symbol, but his image is everywhere, often with the slogan, "Big Brother is watching you." Not everyone is invited to the party though. 85% of the population are referred to as the proles. You know, these are the people who are largely ignored because they aren't seen as a threat. The party believes that the proles are too uneducated and distracted by trivial entertainment. They're not even aware of the oppression they live under. Hey, hang on a second, am I a prole? The party itself has two levels, or two classes of people, the inner party and the outer party. The inner party are the elite, right? They make up like 1 or 2% of the population and are the ones who hold real power. Whereas the outer party is comprised of middle-class bureaucrats who carry out work for the party but are still heavily monitored. When I was reading the book, I kept thinking, like, in some ways it would be better to live as a prole. You know, ignorance is bliss and all that. Although you don't have the same material comfort and status, at least you have some sense of freedom, and you don't have to worry about constantly being watched. And I don't want to understate the extent to which people are being monitored. Like, privacy doesn't exist. You have to assume that you are always being watched because the party's surveillance penetrates every part of your life. There are these things called telescreens that are installed everywhere. These don't only broadcast party propaganda, but they're also used as tools to constantly watch and listen to citizens. It's not just these telescreens that you have to worry about though, it's also other people. Loyalty to the party must come before anything else, you know, before your family and friends. If you see something suspicious, no matter who it is, you have to report it. And you don't have to worry about snitches getting stitches because once the party has them, you probably won't see them again anyways. If you went up to a mate and said, "Hey, I tell you what, that Big Brother guy, he's a right pain in the arse," you would be committing speech crime. If you pull a funny face during one of the party's announcements, you would be committing face crime. And it's not just about what you say and what you do. If you even think of anything against the party, you would be committing thought crime. And thought crime is perhaps one of the most chilling concepts in 1984. Because of this, no one can ever feel safe. any internal doubt puts you at risk of being detected by the Fort Police, a secret police force that is tasked with rooting out and eliminating any disloyalty before it even turns into action. In the world of 1984, it sounds like things have gotten quite out of hand, doesn't it? Well, that's the point. Nobody would want to live in a world like this, and reading this book reminds you of how important it is to protect your freedom and question authority before things go too far. The party has even invented their own language as a way of limiting thought. They call it Newspeak, and it's essentially English, except they've just gotten rid of a load of words, because the less words there is, the harder it is to articulate ideas and express yourself. For example, if the word freedom doesn't exist, then, as you can imagine, it becomes difficult to even think about it. Although this new language isn't fully in use yet, it would only be a matter of time. The party's goal is to eventually replace old speak entirely with new speak. One member of the outer party is our protagonist, Winston Smith, and it's through his eyes that we experience what it's like to live and work for the party. Outwardly, he's loyal, but inwardly, he's full of doubt. When the events of 1984 take place, he's 39 years old. His body is frail, and his health isn't great. He's spent most of his life under the party's rule, even working for them in a place called the Ministry of Truth. Now, the party has 4 ministries in total, each with a name that means the exact opposite of what it actually does, but more on that later. The Ministry of Truth rewrites history and spreads propaganda. The Ministry of Love enforces loyalty through fear, torture, and re-education. The Ministry of Peace manages the endless wars and fighting. And the Ministry of Plenty controls the economy, keeping citizens in constant shortage. Together, these ministries work towards the same goal, which is to keep the party in total control over every part of life. And our man Winston is another cog in that machine. When he's working in the Ministry of Truth, he's always altering old newspapers and records to erase facts and information that the party deems inconvenient. He's literally rewriting history so that the party is always right. If there's no evidence that something happened, then it didn't happen. People cannot question what is true if there is nothing to say otherwise, and so through constantly rewriting history, the party shapes reality itself. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Now, when I read this book, my first thought was like, how do they get away with this? Like, is Winston and everyone else who works in this Ministry of Truth just unable to remember things? Like, fair enough, get rid of the evidence and change the facts, but surely people can remember what actually did or didn't happen. It's expressed in the novel that Winston does know the truth. He sees the lies, and he struggles to accept the system that he's trapped in. He wonders to himself whether the people around him share similar thoughts, whether they are aware of these contradictions. But you have to remember that even just thinking this is dangerous. It's literally thought crime. And I guess now is a good time to explain one central concept in 1984, doublethink. Doublethink, as the name suggests, is the ability to hold 2 contradictory beliefs at the same time, accepting both of them to be true. It's really just a form of mental manipulation that the party has imposed through constant control over information, memory, and behaviour. It's what allows people to just accept everything the party says, even if they remember differently. Even just the names of the ministries are perfect examples of doublethink. The Ministry of Truth doesn't tell the truth, it destroys it in favour of the party. And Winston, well, he has a hard time accepting this. But of course he plays pretend in order to survive. He acts like a model party member, obeying the rules, attending events and repeating party slogans, but inside his mind there is a storm. He's questioning the party. And the thing is, he can't talk or confide in anyone because nobody can be trusted. Instead, he's alone with his own dangerous thoughts, and eventually he has to get those out of him. This is something we see at the very start of the book. Winston secretly begins writing in his diary party out of view of the telescreen. This is obviously an illegal act, but also a little private act of rebellion. He's expressing his thoughts against the party, eventually going on to write things like "down with Big Brother" over and over again. You know, as you can imagine, there is a lot of pent-up anger and frustration. He spends his days working in the ministry and attending events such as the 2 Minutes Hate. The 2 Minutes Hate is a daily ritual where every party member comes together to watch various films that portray the party's enemies in the most hateful way possible. It's not like being at the cinema though, you know, you don't have to be quiet. In fact, it's the complete opposite because everyone goes into rage mode. People are screaming, cursing and throwing things. And Winston joins in out of fear, but at the same time he's looking around at everyone thinking, ah shit, I really am alone, like everyone's crazy. It's really just a way to channel people's anger away from the party and towards the common enemy, being one of the other superstates that they are at war with at the time, or Emmanuel Goldstein. And who is he? Well, he's the leader of a resistance group called the Brotherhood, dedicated to overthrowing the party. When I first heard about the existence of this Brotherhood, I was rather excited because I expected there to be some kind of uprising later in the novel. There's something quite alluring about a hidden network of members that are working in secret, sabotaging the party in small ways. They even have a forbidden book that is said to explain the truth. And Winston is also drawn to the idea of the Brotherhood, not because he sees proof it exists, but because it represents something that he's been starving for: hope. If it's real, then he's not alone. There are others out there who feel the same. And just like myself reading the book, I wanted to believe in them. You know, I had these expectations for what's to come, but, well, you come to learn that the Brotherhood might not actually exist. The party could instead be using it as a trap to lure disloyal citizens. It could all just be fictional, another tool for the party. So I kind of knew that I wasn't going to get my classic resistance story. That's been done many times before anyways, so, you know, give me something different. So Winston is constantly thinking about the party and questioning its control. Every day he goes to work pretending to be a loyal, upstanding party member, all the while wondering if anyone else shares his doubts. During the 2 Minutes Hate, he briefly catches eyes with a man called O'Brien, who, to Winston, seems different. He's convinced that O'Brien is thinking the same as him. O'Brien is an inner party member, so yeah, if he is against the party, then that's a big deal. There's also this woman who Winston notices at work, but for opposite reasons. Like, he sees this young dark-haired woman who looks a bit too enthusiastic about working for the party, and so he's very suspicious of her, unsure if she's just very loyal or even a secret spy for the Fort Police. But that all changes when one day she secretly passes him a note saying, "I love you." All of a sudden, she's no longer a threat, instead she's a fellow rebel and a potential love interest. After this interaction, he tries to find a good moment to talk to her alone, but as you can imagine, that's really difficult because they're always being watched and anything out of the ordinary could raise suspicions. Also, you can't just get it off with anyone in the world of 1984. Like, although relationships aren't outrightly banned, you know, they are, like everything, controlled by the party. For example, the party attempts to remove the love from marriages by eliminating any sex that isn't solely for the purpose of reproduction. They basically want to remove all pleasure from the sexual act because it's a distraction, and emotional attachment between two partners is seen as a potential threat to loyalty towards Big Brother. Winston was, or might even still be, married, but it was a long time ago and completely void of love. It was arranged to follow party rules, and there's a moment in the book where he describes the relationship as cold and empty. His wife was so loyal to the party that she was uninterested in sexual intimacy and saw it only as a duty to produce children for the party. Sex is viewed to be a slightly disgusting minor operation, and there are organisations such as the Junior Anti-Sex League which actively promotes celibacy. In fact, Julia is part of that group. She wears like an armband with the league's symbol, but you know, she's a baddie, she's all pretend, and eventually eventually, when her and Winston get to talk for a moment, they arrange to meet in a hidden location. It's in a remote area outside of the city, away from any telescreens and peeping toms, right? Because you know what they're there to do. But not right away, like obviously they talk for a bit first, and Winston is surprised by how much of a rebel she is, openly cursing the party and mocking its rules. But her hatred towards the party is a little different to Winston's. She doesn't get caught up in ideology or theory. She just simply hates the party because it stops her from doing what she wants. She doesn't hope for a large-scale revolution or care for the Brotherhood because she believes that the party will just always remain in power. Instead, she rebels in her own personal way, defying the rules by committing small, everyday acts like what we see here. She even brings some chocolate with her, which she got from the black market, and so they scran that and then do the deed.
A few inches later.
She's around 15 years younger than Winston, but she tells him that she's done this loads of times with other party members, and he actually likes that, you know, not in a weird way, but because anything that hints at corruption fills him with some hope. The fact that she actually enjoys the sexual act, unlike his wife, and is doing it for her own pleasure without a thought for the party, is what really excites Winston. And so after their first date, you know, they make an effort to organise more meetings. But they have to be really careful and tactical about it. Even talking to each other to make arrangements is difficult because they don't want to look suspicious, right? But they do manage to pull it off and have it off, and it gives Winston this new lease of life. Eventually, they rent a room above an old second-hand shop in a rundown part of the Prole district, the same place where he had bought the diary. And this shop is owned by a man named Mr. Charrington, who is a seemingly kind, elderly shopkeeper with a love for history. He's always talking about the old times, reciting poetry and selling antiques, and this appeals to Winston, who has a similar interest for the past. He develops a sense of trust in the old man, which is important given that he's renting this room so that he can meet up with Julia. And obviously, Mr. Charrington tells them that there's no telescreen in there, there's just some old-fashioned furniture, and of course, a bed. And so this room that they have is a small piece of the world where love, privacy and freedom can exist, and this relationship between Winston and Julia lasts for some time. However, on some level, they both know that they'll eventually be caught. Winston seems to be more openly aware of it, saying to Julia that they're already dead and it's just a matter of time, and Julia knows the risks, but she seems to be quite chill about it. You know, in comparison, she just wants to enjoy what they can whilst they can, and isn't really thinking about the inevitable future. It also turns out that Winston was right to sense that O'Brien was not like other party members. It happened at last. The expected message had come. And so he and Julia travel to O'Brien's apartment. Remember that he's an inner party member, and so he lives a life of luxury and privilege. He actually hands them a glass of wine and turns off the telescreen, which allows them to be alone and say all of the things that they need to say. Which is basically, the Brotherhood is real, we all hate the party, we all want them gone, are you up for being part of it? And they both say, yeah, we want in. In fact, they say that they are willing to go to extreme lengths to weaken the power of the party. They'll do anything it takes, with one exception. They aren't willing to be separated. It's true love. And now that they're both part of this brotherhood, they receive a copy of the Forbidden Book. Winston is full of hope and excitement, having finally found a powerful ally in O'Brien. So Winston and Julia get to read this forbidden book, and so do we, right? As the reader, we also get to read some of its chapters, and the author, George Orwell, uses this as a chance to expand the world of Oceania, giving us a clear explanation of the party's methods for control, of totalitarianism. It goes on for quite a while, and Julia falls asleep, but Winston keeps on reading. And you know, the book is explaining how the party does what it does, but he really wants to understand why it does what it does. That's the question that he wants answered, and the book doesn't do that. It doesn't actually tell him anything that he did not already know. Instead, it just systemized the knowledge that he already possessed. Now at this point in the book, I really found myself rooting for Winston. I felt the same way he did, like I wanted to see the Brotherhood in action. I wanted the party to suffer, and I fully expected to get all of that, but, well, things start taking a turn for the worse. They wake up in the morning and are enjoying a rare moment of freedom when, all of a sudden, loads of soldiers burst into the room. Fucking Mr. Charrington. It turns out that there was a telescreen hidden behind a painting and that Mr. Charrington was secretly a member of the Fort Police all along. Both Winston and Julia are captured, separated and taken to the Ministry of Love for interrogation and torture. I knew this was coming, and so did they, to be fair. You know, they knew that they'd be caught eventually, but you still hope for it not to happen. Part of me was still hoping that the Brotherhood would come and rescue them, but it was made clear earlier that the Brotherhood won't do that. They might try and sneak in a razor blade for you to, you know, end things on your own terms, but yeah, at this point, all hope is lost. Their rebellion comes to an end and their punishment begins. The Ministry of Love is one of the most feared ministries out of them all, and at the start of the book we are told that it's a large windowless building, heavily guarded and impossible to enter unless you are arrested. The party says that it's there to maintain law and order, but in reality, it's where the party carries out torture, brainwashing, and the re-education of anyone who disobeys. And we get to see all of this happen to Winston. He's first taken to a cell and is held there for what feels like days. There's a constant come and go of prisoners, some of which Winston knows. A man named Ampleforth is there because he was rewriting a famous poem and allowed the word God to remain at the end of a line. He also meets another man there named Parsons, a man who we met earlier in the book, and this surprises Winston because Parsons is a real square, right? Like, he's always been loyal to the party. It turns out that he's arrested for thought crime because he shouted "down with Big Brother" in his sleep, and his own daughter, who's just a little girl, reported him to the patrols. The party indoctrinates children from a very young age, and so a lot of them are like spies for the party, even against their own family. And like, the worst thing is, right, Parsons is shocked and ashamed at himself, but proud of his daughter. Eventually, O'Brien steps into the cell, and Winston is shocked to see him. He thinks that he's also been arrested too, but it's revealed that O'Brien wasn't even a member of the Brotherhood. He just pretended to be, in order to gain their trust and get them to reveal their thoughts about the party. In reality, O'Brien is a completely loyal inner party member who simply used their trust as a trap. And so this also brings into question the existence of the Brotherhood, right? Like, is that even real, or just another way for the party to manipulate people's hope? This is a complete betrayal for Winston, and to make things worse, it's O'Brien who oversees Winston's torture, or re-education, let's say, because that's how O'Brien and the party sees it. He doesn't just use physical pain, he uses psychological manipulation, forcing Winston to accept the party's version of reality. Some of you might have heard the phrase 2 + 2 = 5. Everyone knows that it equals 4, including Winston, but the party demands that they accept that it equals 5 if they say so. And this isn't just about lying, it's about controlling reality. Another example of doublethink. O'Brien tells Winston that true loyalty isn't just about obeying through action, but it's about obeying through thought. And so 2 + 2 = 5 is like a test, right? This comes after a very long period of torture and brainwashing. I'm obviously just summarising things here. Eventually, Winston gives in and accepts that 2 + 2 = 5, and we see how he's been broken, but his re-education doesn't end there. You see, obedience isn't enough. The party doesn't just want Winston to act loyal, it wants him to love Big Brother. And I was thinking, you know, why don't they just kill him, right? You assume everyone gets this same treatment, including Julia, but why go to such lengths? Well, O'Brien, he actually explains this to Winston. He says that we do not merely destroy our enemies, we change them. Death isn't enough for them. If they had just executed Winston, he would die still hating the party, still loving Julia, and believing his own thoughts. Even in death, some part of him would still remain free, and that is unacceptable to the party. They don't allow people to die as rebels. We learn that even after this long process of re-education, only once the party has fully reshaped a person's mind do they finally execute them. A quiet shot in the back of the head. And all of this is explained by O'Brien as he's dealing with Winston. He talks to him in a kind of friendly, sympathetic way, acting like he's helping Winston understand. You know, it's peak psychological manipulation. He even allows Winston to ask questions and goes on to answer the one question that Winston's always been asking, which is, why? Why do all of this? Again, he understands how, but he doesn't understand why. Well, the answer is simple. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. They don't do it for wealth, comfort, or any ideological goal. They don't care about the good of society or about making life better for its citizens. Their goal is absolute control over everything. Power is not a means, it is an end. O'Brien says, if you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face, forever. It's all very depressing, and honestly, it doesn't get any happier. At the end of Winston's re-education, we see how he has come to accept the party's version of reality. It seems as though O'Brien was successful in breaking Winston's mind and reshaping him into a loyal, unquestioning supporter of Big Brother. But one thing remained. His love for Julia. He suddenly wakes up crying out her name and immediately regrets it. His feelings for Julia represent a private rebellion, and the party knows that as long as Winston loves her, there's a part of him they cannot own. His re-education is not complete until he betrays her. And so he's sent to Room 101. Room 101 is the most dreaded place in the Ministry of Love, the final stage of torture. For each person, it's different because it's where they confront you with your worst fear. For Winston, his worst fear is rats, and so they use this as a way to force him to abandon his love for Julia. They have this rat in a cage which they bring closer and closer to Winston's face. They threaten to let the rats attack, and at that moment he panics and screams for them to do it to Julia. And by doing this, he abandons his love and loyalty to her, sort of like a final emotional surrender. It's what the party needed to fully control him. First, they took his mind, and now they've taken his heart. It's assumed that Julia received the same kind of re-education, and towards the end of the book, we see that Winston has been released, but he's a shell of a man, completely broken. He actually sees Julia again. They bump into each other when walking through the park, and I kind of think about this part quite often, like they meet and Winston recognises that something has changed in her as well, both physically and mentally. They stare at each other, but there's no connection. She says, "I betrayed you," and he says, "I betrayed you as well." And then they don't have much more to say after that. And again, I'm just summarising here, but this part was really quite chilling, to be honest. At the very end, we see Winston sitting alone in a cafe, and an announcement is issued from the telescreen. It's broadcasting news of military victory and celebrations. Winston looks up at one of the large posters of Big Brother, and tears start to trickle down his face. But the tears are not for pain or loss, they are for relief and acceptance, because finally he loves Big Brother. And that concludes 1984 by George Orwell. It's heavy stuff. It's definitely a book that I will have to read again sometime, but I get it, I get why this book is so important. It was even banned in some places because of its content and themes, which, is quite ironic. It really is a cautionary tale of unchecked power. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. I had a lot of fun making it, and I look forward to doing the same for many more books that I will be reading for the first time. Until next time, goodbye.